Hey there, I'm Scott, and this is Tangents. Well, it is the 21st of November 2021, the Sunday right before Thanksgiving. As you can hear, probably, Jasper is still here, and I don't know what he makes of me recording these, but he definitely is not bothered by it. He's, if anything, trying to play more, and who knows what he's doing. Anyway, this is probably going to be a short one, partly because Jasper is here and gonna have to entertain him, and partly also just it's Sunday night, and as always, I'm tired. It's just frustrating. It's I know I'm a broken record on that, but it's just so frustrating. I'm so like the feeling of being rested and waking up and just being like fresh for the day. Uh, I remember it very clearly, and I've not really experienced it in quite some time. The last time I can remember really feeling great in that way was probably like almost approaching a decade ago. I was in Paris, and I've talked about this before, but I was sick actually. I had some kind of respiratory thing. Went to the pharmacy and got cough syrup with Finagrin and codeine. Took more than the recommended dose. I wasn't like trying to overdose on it. I'm just like took a big swig, but probably significantly more than one was supposed to. And I slept so well. I woke up. I was still sick, mind you, but I woke up refreshed and like, wow, like this is what it used to feel like, other than being sick. You know, it's such a weird thing. Like when you're sick, at least in my experience, whatever my current state is feels like it's forever. If I have money in my bank account, it feels like I have an infinite amount in there. It's not going to run out. If I have no money in my bank account, it feels like it's never going to get refilled. If I'm feeling healthy, it feels like being sick is just a random concept that I can barely conceive of. And if I'm sick, it's hard to imagine being healthy. It's a very weird thing. Jasper is taking a nap over here, so I think he's probably just annoyed that I'm talking with you and not with him, which is honestly fair because you're not here and he is. Just remembered something. I saw Gil, had lunch with him last week, and can't remember exactly what he said, but we were talking, and he was just kind of, not quite making fun, but talking about how I tell stories. And Gil said, Scott, no, but he was talking about how I would, when I recount, slightly different meaning. When I tell a story about something somebody said, I often start with, like Scott, da 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 da, which is what they're saying, but I guess it's a little odd, or at least he thought it so. Not bad, but just different, which to me is fine. I have no real point to that, and I'm so fucking tired. I'm the combination now of like extremely tired. My computer is in the next room, and as always, also that fan is going insane. And I just like this is probably gonna fall apart, fall asleep, fall. No, but I just don't even know. What I wanted to talk about today, though, is suffering, and not suffering in like the big sense of like life is suffering, or you know the, at any moment in time, it's somebody's worst day, worst moment in their life. Pretty much guaranteed, given the population. Someplace on the world, somebody is having the worst moment right now, and that's always true. I mean, the best as well for somebody else, but obviously the same person at different times will have, well, both, hopefully. I mean, I guess there's no guarantee that you'll have a great moment in life. It's kind of sad because it's easy to look from our perspective and forget that there is a huge chunk of the world living in just abject poverty. with no running water or sewage or things that we just take for granted. Um, they don't exist, and it's not like thousands of people or millions of people. It's like order of a billion people are under circumstances which are just almost inconceivable to the bulk of us, certainly to probably almost anyone listening to this or watching it. And that's not the suffering I want to talk about. And the suffering I really am interested in, it's kind of actually spurned upon by Jasper, I have to say. And the suffering is really kind of, I don't know. I mean, I have a sort of an idea. I don't know if you'd call it a theory, but my thought is, generally speaking, that the spectrum of human experience is sort of, it's kind of set. Within an individual, you have a range of like, what is the best thing, the best feeling, and what is the worst feeling. And that range is calibrated based on your experiences. So, if you're someone who is in good circumstances, then your range is kind of, your best and your worst. Your worst might be much better than most people's best, but it still feels to you like the worst. I think this is why you see so many cases of like people who are raised with a ton of privilege, and they're just miserable because to them, and I don't think it's because they're being unreasonable or anything. It's like to them, based on the calibration of their experiences and their mind's set point, they're miserable under circumstances which other people would consider, almost idyllic. And then similarly, people can live in very impoverished circumstances. And for them, like literally you're in the ghetto or concentration camp. And, pretty bad fucking circumstances. Your experience has a range. And to some extent, I think, it certainly takes time to get acclimated to wherever you are. Like if you're going from your current life to something horrible, it'll take you time to get adjusted. But give it some time, and your range of experience will be, such that you'll have good days, you'll have bad days, you'll have happy and sad times, relatively speaking, even under miserable circumstances, and you'll have terrible, sad times even under the best circumstances. And the range of those experiences, and I'm really convinced the way that they'll feel to you, your subjective experience of them, is kind of more or less set for you. And, the reason that I really am thinking about this, I guess two things. One, going back to Jasper. Jasper was a rescue dog, and before he was in the shelter, when my partner picked him up, he was on the street. And you can tell he has a lot of separation anxiety, not just like the standard kind of separation anxiety for a dog, but like he's got to be with me or with Chantal constantly. Like basically, to the extent that Chantal is bothered by it. I'm not so much bothered by it, but I'm, I guess I'm more pliable with that, or more, my range of what's reasonable is different. But he's definitely always here. And to the extent that, I wouldn't say I'm bothered by it, I'm more like, dude, live your life, have other experiences. It doesn't have to all be focused on me. And I'm just kind of thinking, like, obviously we don't know what happened to him when he was younger, before he was in the shelter. I suspect he was either slightly abused, maybe just slightly, but more probably abandoned. And you can tell he has this sort of feeling like he's just desperately grabbing on to anyone. And, well, anyone could be me or Chantal, not like any random person, but grabs onto you and just has to be there all the time. And if you leave for a moment, it's very stressful for him. And I would say to him, like, again, it's as stressful to him as something that might seem like a much bigger deal to you, but of course his spectrum for that is, it's set for his life experiences and his kind of range of dog experiences. He's generally speaking a very happy dog, mind you, but I leaving him alone is a little difficult. And even if I do it, I'm working kind of on getting him used to sort of being home, and then I'll like walk, not around the block, but around a kind of short demi block over here and come back. And every time I do it, he's like at the door waiting. And I don't think it's because he hears me approaching. I think it's just because he's like sitting at the door the whole time. I have had a couple of small occasions where he would just lay someplace. Like I'll be working in my office and then he'll be out on the couch. And it's actually kind of a nice and unusual thing there. I think it's I think it's good. So, but anyway, this is his range of suffering. PTSD in his case came from who knows what. I think it's PTSD. I mean, it's hard. Obviously, I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't, therapize a dog. But I think, at least my interpretation is he's kind of got that, essentially. Like, he had traumatic experiences. And now he's just a little hypervigilant, a little extraordinarily, keyed in to, like, can't let somebody leave because if they leave, they might never come back. I think that's, I don't know what dog cognition is like, but to the extent that a dog can have that kind of a thought, I think that's the feeling, at least, the idea, more or less, that he's having. But, and I think also, like, obviously he hasn't really experienced a very long time. I think he's like, and it's 5-6 years since Chantal adopted him. I don't know where that came from. I'm gonna blame sleepiness, but it's been like half a decade, and I think it's something where like the rest of his life he's just gonna be kind of like that. And the amount of harm that happens, the amount of like lasting impression childhood events have, obviously in him, but also like people, it's really, really staggering. I mean, you can see people who are in their 40s or 50s, and certainly also like, I'm not saying it stops there. I mean, Trump is in his, I don't even know, 70s maybe, and you can see that shit like his dad not really loving him and kind of just, being an asshole probably informs who he is. And I'm not saying, by any means that this excuses anything that he did or makes it right, but it makes it understandable, You can kind of look at him in that context and you're like, I understand to some extent where your assholishness and just general awfulness comes from. And you look at that and you're like, you've spent 3/4 of a century. And to be fair, I don't think he is someone who has done even the slightest bit of therapy or made any effort really to improve himself. So it's not to say that, like, and there are other people who probably would have not been so broken as he was. People have different temperaments. They have different reactions to certain kinds of upbringing and such. But, it's still, you look at that and it's like, and I think also the people who vote for him, the people who are like piss on liberals and I'm gonna vote for Trump just because, fuck you and fuck it, and piss on Obama and all that. I mean, like, what the fuck happened to these people? I don't know. I don't really care. But I do think to some extent that it's the same kind of shit. It's like they, daddy didn't love them or, didn't hug them enough or, God knows what. I don't know. I don't care. But I do think that it's stuff like that, bad things that happened in their childhood, and also just not being raised well, that kind of cast a long shadow. And now you have people who are in their 40s or their 60s or their 80s who are just assholes because, because of how they were raised and because they've not made any effort to really, grow. The other thing, the other reason I wanted to talk about suffering is actually kind of a response to Gil, because we were talking, we're at Four Peaks, and he's sort of saying, like, well, I kind of have this feeling. He's like, Scott, I kind of have this. No, he didn't say that, but he was saying, I kind of think, I'm paraphrasing, not quoting, but kind of think that suffering in his mind is what causes progress to a large extent. He was talking about, for example, Turing. So Turing, World War II, in a situation where code breaking was necessary, he had an opportunity present itself, and it really kind of like amped up where he was able to go. But Gil's sort of thesis here, such as it is, was that if Turing wasn't being oppressed for being gay, if he wasn't in a situation where he had all of these hardships and, really a kind of horrible, miserable life in a lot of ways, which is not to say that he didn't have good, happy things happen to him too, but ended very tragically, and he was treated like shit, despite being, somebody who made a massive contribution to the war effort. One of the people, there are not that many people where you could say, like, if that person wasn't there, then the outcome of the war could have been different. He probably is in that category. Churchill. Churchill's also like a massive asshole, but people seem to generally agree. I'm not a historian, so I don't have, the encyclopedic knowledge it would take to be able to say one way or another here, but a lot of people who do know, seem to think Churchill was just like the perfect person for the perfect moment. That post-Chamberlain World War II period. And then after the context of that war, he was horribly ill-suited to be prime minister or to really do much of anything. It's an interesting thing. I mean, you can kind of, if it's a lock and key mechanism, are kind of fit. There are some locks that just happen to get into those tumblers at the right time and the right place, and things just, fit. So anyway, Gil's idea was this, and I brought up Einstein, who made a lot of contributions through his life, and Gil's like, well, Scott, Holocaust, so shit. Yeah, okay, you may have a point. You do have a point there. But I do think, nonetheless, that, like, I just imagine, I can only speak to myself. And I'm not under the delusion that I'm a typical person or that I'm in any way representative, but I can only say for myself that if I was in a situation where I didn't have to do what I consider to be stupid shit for work, to make money, to pay the bills, I would be working on other stuff that would contribute to, sort of the sum of human knowledge. I'm pretty sure that I would do more, I would make a bigger contribution if I wasn't under those circumstances. And also, like, if I was under, like, imagine, did not have to work, could just have like a nice place to live, sufficient food, shelter, entertainment, companionship, all of the stuff that you need. I'm pretty sure that I would continue to tinker around and work on stuff. Ideally, I'd probably find people and work on stuff as a team, and probably I would like to think would be doing things and getting further than I am now. I say this because, frankly, I'm not, in my mind, I mean, to be fair, a lot of people start companies and a lot of people don't end up having, multiple people on the payroll, don't have insurance through the company. I haven't worked for somebody really in, I don't even know how long ago it was. Like, it's probably like a decade and a half now. And I've had some really big struggles in that time. And I would say that I experience, apologies for the licking, that is Jasper's like right there, and I assume that's coming right through. And if you have misophonia, yeah, but it's okay. Yes, I'm talking about you. You're a good boy. But yeah, if I was in the circumstances where I could just sort of live, first off, I would probably have studied much more. I would have stayed in school for much longer. I would like to say I'd probably have a couple of PhDs, probably, and in fact, even in my PhD, the reason that I picked the research topic that I picked, which was frankly, it was interesting and it led me to good things, but it was also like not really pushing the envelope in terms of humanity. The work I wanted to do, the subject I wanted to study, the thing I wanted to work on, I think, first off, I think I could have done it. My advisor, I kind of brought it up and proposed it, and he was like, that's really ambitious. I'm pretty, maybe it's just arrogance, maybe I'm just, you know, who knows? But I would have liked to have tried. You know, I don't like the idea of failing at something because you haven't tried it. And that's frustrating. But I do feel like I would have done something much more interesting. And the reason that I went with the advisor I went with was that he had money. And, you know, not even that much money. I was a research assistant getting paid like 20 grand a year, you know, which compared to nothing is something, but you know, it's not really that much money. It's not a great situation. And the weird thing is it actually costs for a grant like 40, 50 grand because you're paying for tuition and a bunch of other overhead and stuff. And you know, weirdly enough, if you pay a RA 20 grand, or you pay a postdoc like 50 grand, it costs you, when you're budgeting for the grant, roughly the same amount. Depends on the university and their circumstances, but it's fucked up. It's an interesting thing. If I would have, I mean, I think also like about, certainly, if I could have just gone off, I would have done that. I probably would have either made it work or made a decent, you know, chunk of the way to what I wanted to work on. I think that would have made a much bigger contribution than probably anything I've done in my life to date. And that's like something that I would have done in my 20s. And then you go on beyond that and you're like, okay, I wouldn't be working in just a stupid job that, you know, where I'm doing stupid shit for other people. I'd be working on problems that I thought were interesting. I'd be working on problems that I thought were meaningful or would matter to people. And, you know, also, when I do work on those things now. I work on to the extent that I can. But the problem is I have like a very, very, very finite amount of time and bandwidth. And almost all of it is spent on shit that still uses up that energy, still uses up the time, still uses up the same amount of expertise and mental capabilities and capacity and all of this. But it does not push the ball forward at all. I'm convinced, honestly, frankly, that if people, by and large, I mean, you know, there's always this idea that, well, if people didn't have to work, they'd just play video games all day and yeah, okay, maybe some people would. Although playing video games is apparently now a job. I mean, there's Twitch and people, streamers make a shit ton of money playing video games. But, you know, I do this not even to make money. I just do it kind of for fun and to talk with, you know, well, I guess more than a handful of people, but like, yeah, I don't even know what the numbers are. Order of 100 people, few people in video, and, you know, or maybe more will watch later on. I don't know. But whenever I do it, it's not for money. Like I don't make this because there's like some struggle that I need to fulfill. It's just I'm compelled to do it. Why am I don't fucking know. I honestly, you know, most of the stuff I do, the things that interest me, I could give you a rationalization, but it would probably be a post hoc rationalization. It wouldn't be the actual underlying reason that I do it. It's just, I like doing it. I find it, yeah, I've always enjoyed, which is weird because I've always been, especially when I was younger, painfully shy. Which is also weird because when I was really young, really, really, really young, you know, like, I don't know, 5 or 6, I would get an extension cord, and I don't think I was actually even singing. I don't know what the fuck I was doing, but I would get there and get in front of you know, the relatives at holidays and like sit there like I was singing or something, doing a show or whatever, which is weird because at that age, I guess at some point I got self-conscious, or I got you know, maybe it was some part of metacognition turned on, or who knows what, whatever it was. Um, yeah, big change. There's a weird knock outside that just kind of off-putting. So then, yeah, you go forward, and it's like, I don't know. I spent a lot of my life just being very painfully shy, and it was kind of, I guess, in a weird way, listening to Loveline and Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew, who now I look at as just horrible people, frankly, and I'm so disappointed in probably who they were at the time, but certainly who they've become. And, you know, still, I mean, this is a thing. Like, people have good and bad sides. Experiences can be good and bad. That was something which, you know, I'd listened to them, and it really, I don't know, it felt a little bit like companionship, but it also kind of, I don't know, just tickled the right parts of my brain. And the idea of being able to do that for somebody else partly was interesting to me. The idea of just doing that, I don't know why it would appeal to me, because, you know, given, like, I'm a person who does not take selfies. I've taken like a dozen or so selfies in my life, and it was because my therapist recommended it, because I'm not really a selfie guy. This was years ago when I was like putting together dating app profiles, and I just, yeah, I mean, I see photos of myself now, and it's not that I think I look bad necessarily. It's just like something just, I don't feel great about my image. And I also don't have like any real desire to sit there and pose and do the stuff that, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. Or interesting to me at least, I follow a decent number of models on Instagram. And yeah, I've gathered from that modeling actually, and this is kind of a stupid thing to even say, but you might have this idea, or I certainly did at one point when I was much younger, that, you know, modeling is just like being attractive and then having people take pictures of you. And it becomes quickly apparent that that's actually not the case, that there's actually, yeah, and I'm not saying like it's the most highly skilled thing in the world, but there's some skill to it. There's like, oh, I'm going to pose this way, I'm going to go there, and then I'm going to put in like a full day worth of really exhausting work, just sitting there and posing and doing bullshit and being uncomfortable and getting my picture taken. And this is, you know, kind of modeling at some point. And getting that peak has really, in some sense, been enlightening. You know, I mean, there's a ton of other stuff that I've gathered from that stuff, which is, I mean, it's interesting because, yeah, from a distance you kind of look at it and you're like, oh, these are very attractive people. It'd be kind of nice to spend some time with them. And then you start getting like a little glimpse into what it would be like to spend time with them, and you're like, oh, maybe not. You know, the things they're thinking about, the stuff they're doing, the things that they find entertaining, going to clubs and this kind of shit. It's just like, you know, it bores me so much. When I was in my life, I've gone to clubs, I think, not even a handful of times, probably like 3 or 4 times I've been to a club. And every time uniformly, it was like some friend was going, or I was meeting somebody and they really had to do it, or we went to a birthday party. And then after the birthday party, this was a person who was really into clubbing, and all the people that were at the party were really into clubbing. They went clubbing. I went to the club, and then I think that was the last time I've gotten even close to a club, because I just kind of, you know, after a couple times, you're kind of like, I know what this is about. It's not for me. And you guys go knock yourselves out, have fun. Just, does not do it for me. And I mean, I guess there are multiple layers to that, but like the loud noise, not a fan. People smoking, not a fan. You know, you go in there and it's gross and it's just not, lights are flashing and you're like, well, this is really annoying more than anything. And, you know, I mean, to some extent, I don't know, I've never been to a strip club. And I think to some extent there's an aspect of I'm too in my head, or I don't know what, maybe I'm just too aware of certain things. But I don't think I could enjoy being in a strip club because I'm partly actually due to listening to Loveline, but also partly other things. You know, I kind of understand like the stripper is a human being, B, somebody who, you know, probably, yeah, I mean there are exceptions, but probably has had some issues in their life that have gotten them to that position. And you know, it's just like, C, they're doing this stuff that is kind of, you know, it's attractive, it looks good, it's, you know, but at the same time, they're not doing it for you, they're doing it for money. It's like, you know, there's something very different about somebody who actually is interested in you, taking off their clothes and doing stuff, versus, you know, like some random stranger who's just sitting there doing it because, you know, if I do this, then you're gonna give me money. Like, okay, so I'm just gonna do this, and then you give me money. It's like, okay. It just, from neither side of that equation do I find it appealing. Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong, to be clear, with stripping. It's perfectly fine. Sex work, perfectly fine. I do feel like it is bad, and this goes back to, you know, the hardship thing. If people are interested intrinsically in doing that stuff, it's different than if they're in a situation where they're, you know, can't pay the rent, or they have a kid, or they have, you know, some relative needs surgery, or who knows what, they need cash for something, they need money. And they're kind of like forced, well, they don't have any qualifications, they don't have a lot of training, and they can make a shit ton of money just taking off their clothes or posting nudes on the internet, or, you know, whatever. So they do that. Yeah, if it's something you really want to do, by all means. If you don't want to do it, but you're kind of feeling compelled to do it, I mean, maybe it would be better if we had a world where you didn't need to do it. Yeah, that's just how I feel about that. And yeah, I don't know. If I'm at a club, yeah, I mean, first off, also the dancing thing that people do, it's like, and it's like controlled convulsion kind of thing. It's really, and maybe this is just, I'm not a person who, generally speaking, I do have, you know, like a decent amount of mindfulness and this kind of stuff, but I'm not a person who can sort of like detach myself from the experience and just enjoy it in sort of an abstract, animalistic way. I just don't have that. Yeah, it's not that I'm like suppressing it. It's like not a thing for me. You know, people like woo, all the screaming and the whistling and all that kind of shit for, you know, oh god. When I was in high school, I had to go to pep rallies. Never had an ounce of pep. You know, even briefly when the Bulls and the Suns were doing well and getting into the finals, and I was watching those games, I enjoyed it, and I felt slightly invested in the outcome, but I never was like cheering and like flipping out. It just does not, it's not a thing for me. It doesn't make sense. Yeah, I see people doing it, and I almost feel like I'm not saying that it's insincere. I assume they're really feeling it and they're moved to do it. But from my perspective, if I was in that position making those sounds or doing the things that they're doing, it'd be fake. It would be like putting on a show. It'd not be like, oh, the moment just moved me and I was compelled to cheer or to, you know, to clap. I've never had, I clap as a sign of respect, but I've never had the impulse to just like, oh my God, I've got to clap for that. It's just, you know, so bravo, bravissimo. It's just not a thing for me. And I don't feel bad about that. I'm not complaining about it. It's just like, for me, not a thing. Does not even compute. going to a club, doing the weird dancing shit. That's not really, not that I've taken dance classes, also a thing that I didn't feel like any real, just does not feel like a natural thing to do for me. But I was into somebody and she was really into dancing. And so for like a year, I took dancing. I took dance lessons. I took even private lessons. Can do like a little bit of salsa and cha-cha and some Latin stuff and just a mix of stuff, but pretty much that. And I got okay, but I just don't feel it. I feel, and it's not like, just to be very clear here, it's not that I'm like in the situation and I'm like, oh, I really want to dance, but I feel so self-conscious. It's just that I'm like, this is weird. This does not, like, I see people doing this. They seem to really enjoy it. They seem to really be into it, but it doesn't feel natural to me. It doesn't feel like a thing that I have any compulsion to do. And that is even less, that I can kind of understand, but when it's just the unce kind of, like weird dancing, if air quotes dancing, even less so. It's not a thing. Like I just don't have that. I really like Vinyasa flow yoga, and that you could say is kind of like dancing in some sense. But it's more, I don't know, it's kind of meditative, and it's kind of a bit of a little bit of a mindfulness thing, and a little bit of just, the instructor tells you to do something, and then you just kind of, do it. And whatever you're doing, and especially when it's like a really good instructor for my taste, they're mixing it up every time, the music is nice, and you're just kind of like listening to them, and then that feels like a thing to me. It wasn't always something that came, it was something I struggled with a little bit, just to be able to do the moves initially, but even from the first time I tried it, kind of felt more natural. It felt like it clicked with me a little bit. It's making me nervous. I must say that the fan on my computer has just turned off, or rather slowed way down. Kind of nervous about that. Anyway, getting back to this, I really do not agree with Gil's, Gil, buddy. No, I'm sorry, that's not a natural way for me to talk either. There are certain things like that I will do, especially, they just don't come naturally. Bro. If I'm saying bro, it's either ironically or, I'm just pretending. It's not a thing. It's not a natural thing for me. Why did the fan turn off? Did the computer overheat? Did it crash? You'll know, because the audio will either be horrible or it'll be fine. And if it's fine and it's just off for some random reason, then I'm talking for no reason about nothing that you're even aware of. But anyway, the whole point of all of that, to the extent that I have a point, is just, I don't think that it's true that human progress is accelerated really by hardship. I don't think, it's true, certainly, like technology gets moved forward by wars. But part of that is just resource allocation. If you're trying to solve a problem, and certainly this is different. If you have a problem you need to solve and you're working on that, that's focusing, and that does advance things. But, like Gil's idea was like, oh, well, Turing was miserable and he couldn't, just get to live his best life. And so that meant that he had all this extra time where he would, and extra energy that was kind of pent up, and that got him like really working extra hard on figuring out Turing machines and all of this stuff. I don't think so. I really don't think so. I would bet, obviously it's a counterfactual and you can't ever conduct the experiment, but I would be surprised, frankly, if he had the same life, lived in the same time and the same opportunities, to the extent that war is an opportunity, and the same challenges in terms of like technical challenges, but he lived in a society that was completely accepting, and he was allowed to be himself, and didn't have the chemical castration and the eventual like suicide. And he lived another 40 years past that. I would bet he would have done more. I would bet I'd be surprised honestly if we wouldn't be further along. Not just because of him, but because of so many other people who are sitting there toiling away in some stupid job that it's not pushing the ball forward, it's not helping anyone. But there are a ton of smart people out there, partly who are not educated because all of our education has been reduced to vocational training. College, it's like, oh, well, you don't go to college unless it's going to pay off. This is not what college is for. College is fucking education. The fact that it helps you in a career is good, but it's circumstantial. The thing that actually matters is learning and understanding more and experiencing. I mean, this is another thing, like the college experience. Yeah, and I'm not somebody who went out and partied and did this kind of stuff, but going through that process of going to undergrad and going to graduate school in a different place, living away from home, experiencing what it's like to kind of live on your own and figure things out for the first time. I think all of that stuff is really valuable. And I think also you're fucking people over when they're like, in order to do it, they're either putting themselves under mountains of debt, or they're putting themselves through school by working their asses off and studying and doing homework and all of this shit. And so, they're getting like a fraction of the experience. If you're able to go through college and not work while you do it and just focus on school, it's a much better experience. You'll learn more, you'll take more away from it. It's just better. And if you didn't have that hardship, if you weren't suffering in that way, then yeah, it would be better. If people who, like, I run into people all the time on Twitter who I'm like, you're actually really, you can see the glimmer of intelligence there. And under the right circumstances, cultivated in the right way, it would have gone in a much better way. But instead, I mean, these people are like watching YouTube videos and getting Dunning-Krugered to death. And they're just like, they're actually causing like net harm. Whereas if they could have gone through, a better path, it is not to say that they'll never improve or never get there, but they could have already been there, right? Without that struggle. Maybe I should call it struggle instead of suffering. Not sure where suffering specifically came from in terms of like why that was what I wanted to focus on. I'm gonna change the name, struggle. Assuming I haven't done that one already, but I think I haven't. With that though, I'm literally just falling asleep. So I'm having trouble, you won't know this if you're listening, but I'm having trouble keeping my eyes open. Probably obvious if you're watching this. And to you, I apologize. Also, I guess there's a change in iOS and they've started by default recording everything in HDR. And so like 2 weeks ago, I thought that I blew out my my color settings on my camera because like the video was just like horrible, like to the point where it was, and I couldn't correct it. There was nothing I could do. Probably would have figured if I would have played with the color graphs, I maybe could have gotten it, but didn't get it and didn't try enough. And so I was like a week late on that. And then finally, I guess what happened is I did the next one and it was also bad. Did some Googling, figured it out, finally got it. And those two are up now. And this one will be up soon. I wish I could just get a fucking full night's sleep. That's something like the amount of I'm not trying to complain too much about this, but like everything I do is a little bit more effort, a little bit less comfortable. It's like I'm constantly just tired. I don't know if I can explain what that's like exactly, but it's like, I mean, you know what it's like to be tired. I'm sure you've experienced that. And now imagine that that's just like your default state, always. You're like tired, it's harder to focus. It's harder to learn things. It's harder to study. It's harder to get it together to work on stuff because, just like working through stuff takes a certain amount of energy. And my default baseline level is low. And I'm just tired. Just fucking tired. Anyway, and I'll tell you something. If I wasn't struggling with being tired, I'd get a hell of a lot more done. So I don't think that helps. And I certainly don't think that, if you had Turing but without the oppression, I'd bet he would have done more. If you had Einstein and without the Holocaust, I would bet that he would have done more, not less. Although he did so fucking much. I mean, it's almost a joke when you look at the stuff that he's done, and you just look at like his thesis, and just the range of subjects too, like StatMech, and special relativity, and general relativity, and quantum mechanics, and all of these things, and it's just like, it's very cool. I know I've talked about this before, but like most people who make a major contribution, you look at Feynman. People think very highly of Feynman. He's a very good speaker. And I think he was a smart guy. I'm not saying he wasn't. But his contributions are much more focused. This is not to say that they're all exactly this one little thing. And it's not like he just drew the squiggly lines and the arrows and stuff. He did more. But his contributions are much more focused. And you could go through I was going to give a list of names, but you go through different people, and Dirac or Pauli or they're much more focused. They have mixes of stuff, but much more, like the scope of their work is much tighter. Whereas Einstein was just all over the place. And I mean, there's an interesting thing actually. If he had, like the end of his life, he spent working on this unification of electromagnetism and gravity, and could not really figure out how to combine that and quantum mechanics. And but I mean, there are some interesting things like higher dimensional manifolds, where you're combining curvature and the electromagnetic tensor and kind of having some kind of embedding stuff, and you work on that and you get someplace. It's interesting. You wonder where he would be today if he could have lived an extra 100 years, for example. And of course there's something to be said. There's a really, I personally, I would, given my druthers, I would live, not necessarily forever. Wouldn't know. You probably don't want to live forever, but indefinitely would be kind of nice. And when I say that, I don't mean like you're super old. I mean you're basically like as healthy as you are in your 20s or 30s, and you basically just go on like that indefinitely. I would fucking love that. I know a lot of people who are like, they're young too, and they're just ready for life to be over. And it's like, what the fuck, man? If life is that bad, find something better. And it's like, also, I'm not, obviously, like people who commit suicide are not just, generally speaking, you're talking about people who are mentally ill, and it's not like they're, just thinking rationally about these things and all of this. But at the same time, it's just like life is going to be over before you know it. I mean, I know it seems interminable, but it's so fast. It's like, I mean, it was a blink ago that I was watching Quantum Leap, and a couple weeks ago, Admiral Calavici, Dean Stockwell died. And it's like, it's crazy. It's just, human life is so short. But there was a thing that Steve Jobs did. I guess it was his Stanford commencement speech. And he's talking about a bunch of stuff. And one of the things he's talking about in there is how death was one of the, in his words, was this great invention. And, like it clears things out to bring in the new. And the thing about that gets me is like, for me personally, not a thing that, if I could live indefinitely, I'm all in. Yeah, I like it. Would not want to cut my life short. It's already too short as far as I'm concerned. But then you start thinking about it and you're like, well, imagine Trump. Imagine that Peter Thiel actually figured out longevity. Like, because he's been working on it for a long time. He's got a lot of money. Imagine he somehow magically figured it out. And now he solves it for himself. He gives it to people like Trump, who are fucking horrible. I mean, you see how bad Trump is now. Imagine Trump with a couple hundred years more to ruin things. I don't even want to. It's a horrible, horrible thing. Like, the one positive thing about Trump is that he's old. Although when you think about it, like his dad died pretty fucking old. And even though Trump is not a healthy person, I assume he's probably on track to go about the same length. That's like 20 more years that we have with this motherfucker. Yeah. And that's a lot of time and a lot of harm could be done. And especially given the fact that, like, as far as I'm concerned, looks very likely that the Democrats lose in 22. They're not doing things to protect voting rights. They're not doing things to protect or to reform the courts or any of these things. So it's very easy to imagine Trump winning again in 24 and things going really fucking south, I mean, like, as bad as they were before, things could get a lot fucking worse. And you imagine also, I mean, it's fortunate, frankly, that Trump is lazy and kind of stupid. Because if you took the amount of energy that he has, the motor that he has, and you applied, it's kind of weird to say that he has a motor and he's lazy, but it's true. It's like he has energy in a certain way, but it doesn't translate to actually doing hard work. It just translates to this filling this endless hole within himself. But if you took him and he had a bit more intelligence and was actually a hard worker, and especially like if he was not so transparent, it's easy to imagine like a version of him that's even relative to the real one fucking horrifying. It's also easy to imagine, I don't know, I can think of many paths where we could go, and obviously probably reality will diverge very quickly from any of the paths that I'm imagining, but it's good to know that hopefully he will not live forever or even indefinitely. And I guess if the cost of there's a fucking pain in the ass. It's like, well, if the cost of you living indefinitely is that he gets to live indefinitely, then obviously that's a really fucking high price. If you could do like I get to go and he doesn't, okay. Although, more probably what would happen is he has all of these resources, he gets to live indefinitely and most people don't. And, that's awesome. That's really just turns the planet into a shithole. Anyway, with that, losing my voice and fucking tired of shit. On the cheerful note of that, thank you as always for listening, and 再见.